For Victims and Villains, my name is Josh. Today we are jumping into the Norwegian horror drama film Handling the Undead. Handling the Undead is an anthology film that tells the story of three families that undergo a death in the family and how one night during an electrical storm, the source of the death in the family comes back to life, and kind of how the family really grapples with zombies. I really struggle to call this movie a horror film simply because there's so much more emotions that this movie encapsulates. It operates a lot like a drama, but it has these very subtle nods and touches and roots in the horror genre, so it kind of feels like this really interesting mix of both drama and horror. And the way that the two kind of run parallel is a thing of mastery, and kind of how they collide ultimately during the climax just leaves you breathless. I feel like the closest other movie that I could compare this to, tonally speaking, would be Train to Busan, where it is very clearly a zombie movie, but there is a lot of emotions that are underlining that zombie movie and that approach to the storytelling that I think is just a thing of mastery. And it's like, it feels exactly like that. This movie kind of feels like a more elevated and or even more elegant version of Stephen King's Pet Sematary. I think the way that the climax and the way that the finale of this film kind of encapsulate, and how they're built off of everything that have been happening in all three of these stories, is just spectacular. This movie made me feel things that I hadn't felt in a really long time watching a horror movie. As I mentioned, this story has three different stories that run parallel. It kind of has this anthology feel to it without actually being an anthology, because of the way that all three of these stories kind of run not only parallel but also kind of mirror one another. First, we have a father and a daughter whose son/grandson unexpectedly dies, and they're kind of grappling with that grieving process. And you have a stand-up comedian whose wife gets into a car accident, is pronounced dead, and then comes back to life. And you're kind of grappling with how to be potentially a single parent, but also at the same time trying to process what is currently happening. And you have a elderly couple whose one wife dies, leaving the other wife a widow, and kind of how that process also reflects into a little bit of like the older age aspect as well. I love how this movie encapsulates the grieving process. I'll talk about this more in the mental health section, but grief is something that doesn't look the same for everybody. I love how this story explores that subject of how grief looks different on everyone, especially considering the relationship that you have to whoever has passed away. I feel like the best way that I can describe this movie in a word is very elegant. The score is just absolutely breathtaking. It's spectacularly and hauntingly beautiful. The cinematography in this movie is just immersive. You really feel what the characters feel. It's really awesome that cinematography really matches the emotional state of not only the themes in the movie, but also at the same time the characters and their journeys. I love how this movie really encapsulates the desperation that often comes with the grieving process, and how it kind of feels like this unspoken extension of grief. And I really loved how that was explored here. I think that the way that the themes in this movie are explored are just absolutely exceptional. This is like top tier storytelling right here that is illuminated by just absolutely outstanding acting, and probably, I would even argue, some of the best performances that you'll find this year. I think if I had like one complaint about this story, is that the way that it transitions between kind of each of these stories, and there's no intersection, which there doesn't necessarily need to be an intersection, but it just kind of feels like sometimes it spends too long on one set of characters and before moving on to another. There comes a point in the story where it focuses a little bit too much of its storytelling at times on the families, which isn't necessarily a problem, but by the time that we got to the older married characters, I had actually even forgotten that their story was a part of the larger narrative because it had been focusing on so much on these two families. The attention to the narrative and to each respective arc kind of feels a little bit uneven, and I really kind of wish that we would have seen them maybe done in a little bit more of like a traditional anthological setting where you're focusing on one family, second family, married couple, and so on and so forth. I think it would have kind of allowed for a little bit more of like an even balance, and then you could have had the stories kind of collide in the last 15 to 20 minutes. Overall, I am ready to run this one through the Rorschach rating scale, though. I'm going to go ahead and give Handling the Undead a 4 out of 5. I think this movie is just absolutely beautiful. From a visual point, from an emotional standpoint, from a thematic standpoint, from an acting standpoint, and even from the score as well. This movie just perfectly captures probably one of the best ways I've ever seen put to film the grieving process and the complications and complexities that come with that. And I just absolutely adored what this movie made me feel going through it. It is an emotional roller coaster, and it's a beautiful in every sense of that word during its 98-minute runtime. Handling the Undead opens up in a limited release from Neon beginning this Friday, May 31st. Check your local listings, because if you get a chance to see this movie on the big screen, take it. I cannot recommend this movie enough. But let's talk about mental health. If you guys are new to our content, Mental Health Moment is where we take a theme of mental health out of the film, which we're talking about, deconstruct it for a few moments in the hopes to deconstruct the stigma surrounding mental health. Obviously, as I mentioned, this film explores the grieving process, and I really want to double down and echo everything this movie says, is that the grieving process looks differently for every person. Grief is not a one-size-fits-all type of thing, and sometimes there's a character in here that just kind of is numb and is processing very slowly and is trying to keep herself busy with work. And then you have other characters in here that are just don't want to be away from the person who died, and being close to them is how they process the grief. And it demonstrates how different and complex and multi-layered the emotional aftermath of grief really is. So if you or someone you know is currently going through the grieving process, be patient with them. Because if it doesn't look the way that it on them as it does on you, doesn't necessarily mean that they're doing it wrong. It just means that they're processing things different. So be patient with them, and check out the mental health resource library in our show notes below for some education and resources that may be applicable to your situation or to their situation. And as always, if you or someone you know is currently struggling with suicide, addiction, self-harm, or depression, please click the links in the show notes below to check out our mental health resource library. Once again, Handling the Undead opens up in limited release from Neon this Friday, May 31st. If you guys have got a chance to catch this during its festival run, what did you guys think? Comment below and let me know. Until next time, hit that subscribe button and stay classy.